5 steps to manage your emotional triggers. Let's face it, we live in a world where we are triggered emotionally day in, day out. And yet so often that ends in us having reactive decisions, reactive behaviors that are not helping us. Today, I want to focus on 5 steps that will take that reactive behavior and introduce the joy of choice in how we respond. The 2 simple words, budget cuts, being talked over, being left out of the loop, having an angry boss, having a negative comment come your way that's unjustified, someone being sarcastic with you. All of these commonly are triggers for many people. Today, we want to take those situations and empower you with 5 different ways that you might be able, instead of reacting to those triggers, to respond with choice. The first step, of course, is to know your particular triggers. I often say that we have a unique fingerprint. Everyone's fingerprint is different. And so it is as well with our trigger print. What triggers us is different. You know, part of the triggers are universal. They come from our evolution. When we're falling, everyone feels afraid. But yet some of our triggers, they're unique to us. They're unique to our history. And so part of the learning here is to identify what is my unique trigger print. And that can be found out with some great self-awareness. Knowing the moments when you have intense emotional reactions. It's this ability to know when we're reacting intensely with an emotion, to think back and say, what happened? What precipitated that response? And then even deeper is to ask, what's at the value at risk when that trigger is happening? So say, for example, for me, one of the things that triggers me is when people are being rude to each other, and that may show up in many different ways. So say, for example, in a market, when someone skips the line, or someone comes with a trolley full of food in the express lane, I get furious. Part of it is, why would I get furious at such a stupid thing? But part of it is, it's my trigger point is based on being courteous and respectful of other people. And for me, that's not being respectful. So getting to know those trigger points can be really important, because once we know our triggers, we can begin to prepare perhaps how we might want to deal with a trigger that keeps happening time and time again. Say, for instance, I worked with a client whose trigger was being talked over. One of the things that happened was that the person who did this was at a meeting every Wednesday at noon. So one of the things she had to learn to do was, how can I manage my trigger each Wednesday at noon, because I know I'll probably be triggered because this person will be at the meeting. That all comes down to self-awareness of knowing what our particular triggers are, and are there patterns in our particular trigger print. Second step is know the physical signs that show up in your body when you are triggered. Here's the lowdown. Our bodies respond with impulses quicker than we can become conscious that we have been triggered and are in an emotion. And so therefore, the better our ability to recognize these impulses in the moment, the better our ability to introduce choice into how we respond. And what are some of those impulses? Well, those impulses are a heart that beats, an increase in temperature. Perhaps we have more adrenaline in our eyes and it's very hard to keep eye contact. Perhaps we're noticing tension in different parts of our body. Hey, you know, I live in DC. So every day I get an opportunity to be triggered when I'm on the roads driving. And when someone cuts in front of me, before I'm even able to say, I'm angry, I'm furious at you, all of a sudden I can feel on the steering wheel, my hands are gripping and they're white because I'm responding with impulses before my anger. One of the ways that we can improve our ability to read these physical sensations happening in our body is to adopt a practice such as a body scan. Body scan is basically a little moment of mindfulness, taking a few minutes every day, and to go from our head to our toes, and to literally question as we go from each part of the body, what's happening in that part of the body? What am I feeling? Am I tense? This practice can be a really great way of building up this muscle within us to recognize what's happening to us physiologically. A third step is the practice of visualization. You know, so often what we need to do is visualize a response that is different to something that is more reactive and not helpful. We know that visualization has incredible power. Look at all the athletes who are able to visualize the race before they run it. I was talking last week, giving a training to a group of surgeons, and they talked about how they use visualization to go through each and every moment of the surgery before it happens. Visualization is most powerful just before we go to bed or when we get up in the morning. So depending on what our trigger point is, can we visualize a different response? Rather than shutting down, can we perhaps visualize another way of reacting? I mentioned earlier a client I was working with, one of their trigger points was being talked over. When we try to introduce some visualization into what they were doing, one of the things that they saw was their ability to not shut down, but rather when the other person had finished, to continue their thought and to be a little more assertive in their communication. That visualization really helped them to deal with that trigger, and over time, the power of that trigger lessened as they became more assertive in their communication. The fourth step is an exercise that was developed by a leadership expert called Ron Heifetz, and he called it getting on the balcony. We live our lives on the dance floor. We live our lives, you ever been to like a crowded dance floor where there's a party happening and you know all the bodies are pressing together, there's very little room and it's just congested with human bodies? One of the ways to detach from that is to get on the balcony and then to look down on the dance floor and see what's happening. And so it comes too with our triggers. At times in the heat of our trigger, we're not able to see exactly what we're doing. But if we're able to get on the balcony, if we're able to look down and see what happened in the midst of that trigger, as if another eye was looking at us, what would we see? Why that's important is that we can begin to recognize patterns in our triggers and help us recognize some unhelpful behaviors before we automatically get into them. And then the fifth step is an exercise that I developed called a 7-second reset. This is in the midst of a triggering moment to be realized that we've been triggered and to reset the buttons so that we can stop and introduce choice before we respond. What's a 7-second reset? Number one, put your feet on the ground, 1 second. Feel the physicality of your feet on the ground. That helps us disengage from some of the emotionality that we're feeling. Seconds 2, 3, and 4 is breathing in. And as we breathe in, we begin to do some of that body scan that I talked about. Recognize, where are we in the moment? Where is tension? Are we feeling it? And what part of body are we feeling the tension in? And then seconds 5, 6, and 7, as we breathe out, we let go of some of that emotionality we're feeling, and we readjust our posture so that we introduce some calm into how we're feeling and some choice into how we want to respond. So there you have it, 5 steps to manage our emotional triggers. Now, if your emotional trigger is for anger, I know for many of us, we have triggers that lead us to anger. You need to watch this video, which talks about how to manage anger in the moment. It'll give you some really incredible strategies.